Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. Hosted by me, Pasitawa Haufano, and my brother,
That's me, Kalolo Haufano.
the Zeducation Podcast features lively discussions,
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Maitai Samoa.
as well as tips on leadership and business by some of the top minds and influencers around the world.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Zeducation Podcast. Welcome to our Zeducation Podcast episode today. We're thrilled to have Renata, a graduate engineer from University of Auckland. Lorraine, hailing from Ngāpuhi, Tainui and Ngai Te Rangi, is not only an engineer but also a passionate advocate for integrating Te Ao Māori and Mātauranga Māori into sustainable engineering practices. She is currently working towards her PhD, focusing on Indigenous perspectives and how they can enrich and transform our approach to sustainability. With her unique blend of academic rigor and cultural wisdom and experience, Lorraine is at the forefront of redefining engineering to include and prioritize Te Ao Māori values. So let's dive into her insights on applying these Te Ao Māori principles to sustainability as a business and as individuals. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me on. I feel like this is the first time. Can I let them know that you're my brother-in-law? Yeah. So again, this is our first podcast together. And this is probably our first discussion besides anime that we get to speak about proper work and mahi and all the things that we do. So
We're also
really
about family, kids and that. And this is
yeah.
probably our first, I want to say professional, but formal discussion.
Yeah, formal professional discussion.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to be here.
Hey, really appreciate it. And it's just easier to tap the shoulder on the family and be like, hey, can you jump on the podcast?
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. But I love the work that you're doing. And this is the reason why we're here having this conversation today. So share something interesting about yourself.
Firstly, I love that question because interesting is subjective, right?
That's right.
So interesting to me, I would say, one thing that a lot of people don't know about me actually is that I've been on 2 TV shows. So, and they've both been like quiz, family, friendly shows, and I did a polling. Oh, actually, no, on my first one I did a polling and I was like, I'm never going to do this again. And I signed myself up to do another one and I won a really cool prize. And so I've been on 2 TV shows, and so you may have caught them if you watch Māori television or TV2, Channel 2 on Sunday, which nobody does, so nobody knows about it.
I love that.
But that's me.
That is so cool and so fun. All right. Well, hey, thank you again. We got you on the show because you're very passionate about Te Ao Māori, especially in your line of work. And I'm pretty keen to get into it. Can you, for our listeners, break down what sustainability is? Because when people think of that word, sometimes it's like very technical. Some of them think, yeah, it's important, but they don't understand why it's important. So break down sustainability. What is it and why is it important?
Yeah, so I like what you mentioned too about not knowing exactly what it is, because a lot of these days, sustainability is greenwashed. So businesses will throw out the word sustainable, and everyone will be like, "Oh yes, green," things like that. But actually, what is it? And so, sustainable practices are anything that support ecological, human, and economic health. So it's all in conjunction with one another. And so that's what I view sustainability as.
Yeah. I've always seen it as like, kind of like what you said there, being eco-friendly, looking after the environment, taking care of it, and like for our future prosperity.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Making decisions today that inform a better future is again another way I like to look at it.
I love it. So let's talk about Te Ao Māori now that we've simplified what sustainability is. Could you explain the principles of Te Ao Māori and how that relates to sustainability?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I do want to put a disclaimer out there and just say that it's impossible to define or describe a worldview in a few sentences, but there is one principle and concept that for me builds the foundation of absolutely everything. So informs belief systems, actions, and practices, and that is whakapapa. And so whakapapa in Te Ao Māori, for me, is that foundation from which everything stems off. And whakapapa is so much more than just genealogy, or how you directly translate it as genealogy. So when I think of genealogy, I think of, this is my mum, my mum's mum, my mum's mum's mum. But whakapapa in Te Ao Māori is actually drawing back on our connections to the land. And so it goes way further. It goes right back to our creation stories. And so again, it's this interconnector of all living and even non-living things and how things operate in that system. And again, that lays the foundation of decision making and practices and management of things. And that's why when we introduce ourselves and we give our pepeha, we come from the land, and then it goes to our marae and to the people. And so that, again, is a practice, I guess you could say, of introducing ourselves, but right up front lets you know, hey, this is our kaupapa, this is what's important to us, is where we come from and who we are.
It's probably one of the things I really love about Te Ao Māori and especially with the whole pepeha thing as an example, is that you acknowledge who came before you. Sustainability, and I love that you're relating that back to sustainability in regards to, it's not just about the future, it's about looking back, learning from the past, learning from them as well, and how that relates to us in the environment that we live in. It makes it a lot more meaningful, eh? You can connect to it.
100%. And again, whakapapa directly translated means genealogy, but if you break down that word, it's layering upon layering. And so, if you know your foundation layer, and the better the foundation it is, the more you can build off it, right? Which is why it's so important for us to acknowledge the past, but also whakapapa looking ahead. I think, in politics, they might be looking ahead 3, 5, 10 years. It's quite immediate, but in Te Ao Māori, when we are future or forward-looking, we're thinking about hundreds and hundreds of years ahead. So it's very big picture because there's so many connectors and everything is intertwined.
So how does whakapapa, like looking back, and I love that principle of layer upon layer, and acknowledging your genealogy and where you came from and where you came from, how does that help with sustainability? Or how does that,
Yeah, so I think there's because Te Ao Māori, I think people get caught up a lot of time that it's not, it's philosophical, and so it has all these concepts and values, and so, well, what does that actually mean and how do we implement that? But Te Ao Māori is incredibly pragmatic, so it is very actionable. Yeah, because it has that expanse or that breadth of vision. It really does inform decision making, and I can give maybe 2 examples. One can be from a pūrākau, so a story, and I share this all the time because it's one of those things that if you get it, you get it. But it's a story of this chief in his village. There's a river that used to run around it, and he would go to the river every day and feed a taniwha and take care of the taniwha. And the taniwha was considered the protector of that particular river. And one day that chief had to go outside the village and visit another village, and he entrusted his sons to take care of the taniwha. So he said, while I'm away, you need to take care of this taniwha. But when he went away, the sons didn't, and neglected the taniwha, didn't feed it. And so eventually the taniwha grew restless and angry, came up onto the land and consumed the sons. And that's pretty graphic, and I don't tell my children that, but what it means is that it has this prioritization of, if you look after the water will take care of the land, and the land will take care of you. And again, sort of draws back to whakapapa in the sense of, where do we come from? The water touches the mountain to the awa, our waka comes in our marae. But it's about prioritizing through decision making. So that's the pūrākau, and I'll put it in a practical sense now. So say, for example, you're designing a product, and typically what happens nowadays is you develop a product and you think, it hits consumer, and that's the end of my responsibility. But if we introduce a term called product stewardship, which in Te Ao Māori terms would be kaitiakitanga, this guardianship, this to take care of the land, or te taia, which is more than just the environment, it's this holistic well-being of everything. Instead of looking at the product and thinking, oh, my responsibility ends at the consumer, if we look at product stewardship, they're very informed and very considered decision making. So it could be not just about developing the product, but actually, where do we get those resources from? Do we get them overseas? And then if we get them overseas, what does that mean for the system ahead? Or if we're getting it locally, again, what resources are we pulling from locally, and how does that affect our environment or our whenua? And then it goes beyond that. So you consider that from the very beginning to the end. So in product, it goes product to consumer. In Te Ao Māori, it's about connecting it back to the whenua, and then also the impact it has on the whenua after the product is in play. And so it's whenua to whenua rather than product to consumer. And so I have a lot of experience in the waste sector, and that's very end game. So like it touches the consumer, and then because they've developed it, I'm like, hey, it's not our responsibility, right? It's now the consumers. And then it's about asking, well, what happens after that? And then we have like all this waste and all these other things. And so again, Te Ao Māori, it's almost like pulling the blinders off, and instead of working just in one line and being binary, it now forms a connection from end to end. So it's a connector rather than being a straight line. To me, it's more like a circle. And so it's those almost three things. It's informed decision making, future thinking, and just building connectors.
I like that. I mean, hey, there's a lot that you shared there, which is pretty cool, to be honest. One of the big things that I really like about it is that story of the taniwha, or the metaphor, whatever you call it. And I'm sure that story's been around for years, been passed on, and there's a moral behind it and a principle, which is, you highlighted there, the ripple effect of your decisions, the consequences. If you look after something, it will look after you back, and that's being kaitiaki and guardians, right? Look after it, respect it, take care of it, and it will return the same thing to you, the land and environment, right? And I like that story is so, it proves that people have been thinking about sustainability for years and have been applying it. But somewhere along the line, that basic principle of just looking after the environment has kind of lost its essence, right? Now we're coming back to basics. We're going back to those stories that our ancestors have used and taught for years. It's like, man, like we've got to go back and learn from the past. And that's what I love about the whakapapa and genealogy. It's not just who was I related to. It's about, what can I learn from them? What did they teach? What were the lessons they left for the future? And I love that in terms of what you talked about. Sustainability doesn't just start with the product and what happens at the end. Sustainability starts at the beginning with the thinking.
Like the beginning.
The beginning.
Yeah.
Sustainability should start at the beginning and at the end as well. It's a cycle thing. So if you're in business, you're designing a product or thing, you're thinking about the environment right at the beginning when you're designing, like, what is this going to be made of? Like, how are we going to make this? So that kind of thing. So I really like that. I think there's power behind it, because I feel like a lot of people don't know how to connect Te Ao Māori with contemporary practices of sustainability.
Yeah.
But there's so much that we can learn there. It's not rocket science, but these stories bring us back to the basics and remind us the importance of it. So tell us about your personal journey there. So how you arrived with your passion and desire to implement Te Ao Māori in your mahi as an engineer.
Yeah, so I grew up and have almost always grown up for majority of my life as an urban Māori. So not on a papakainga, I'm very much urbanised in the sense that my grandparents brought my father to Auckland to learn English and be part of that school system, and so there was a disconnect between his cultural identity. And as a result, we were brought up as what I say is urban Māori. So we very much know how to act in ona marae. We know exactly what to do not to get in trouble from the aunties. You know, we know how to navigate that space. But even if we're ona marae, we're like the white ones. but in growing up, I went to a private school. At school, I'd be the brown one or the Māori one. So it was like this duel or this battle, like pretty much for the majority of my life. Always connected, so I always felt a connection and really safe on a marae. Like I felt like in my heart that's where I belonged and where I needed to be. But there was a heavy hitter, and that was when I served a mission in the Philippines. And I was out, you know, we had to speak Tagalog, we had to speak another language. And so, to communicate with these people. And I was talking to one of the men just on the street. And, I was telling him, I'm from New Zealand. And he was like, can you speak your language? I said, yeah, okay. And so I started speaking English. And he was like, no, your language. And I realized he wanted me to speak Te Ao Māori. And that just hit home because I thought, I could speak their native tongue. I could connect with them. I could speak English, but I couldn't do that for my own people. And so that really triggered, it was like a catalyst for me to exponentially grow in that area. So I've always had that connection, but from that point I was like, man, I need to up my game. Also, when I had children, it was like, I want my children to know who they are. And like Pasi, my children have the longest Māori names in history and very purposefully done that because it links them to their whakapapa and their whenua. So they will always know who they are no matter where they are. And so again, but that moment in my early 20s was a major trigger for me to just be like, understand who I am fundamentally.
Yeah, and sometimes, we need that little, I better research and learn more about where I came from and my identity and my family. But talk a little bit about that. People who might be struggling with, they were in your shoes at one time. It's like, man, I feel like an imposter syndrome. I don't look the part. I'm a little bit, there's a bit of a mix,
Yep.
Pākehā Māori out there and even Pacific Māori. Who might be struggling with their identity. Like, can you talk a little bit about that, some advice and tips around navigating that kind of tough space?
Yeah, so that's really interesting actually because I work in the corporate sector. So there's an office where I turn up to in business attire, and majority of the people that work there are white, older men. In the engineering sector, there's only 30% representation of women, and then there's only 7% Māori and Pacifica. So that's not, it'd be even less as Māori. So, out of a organisation of 600, there's 5 of us. So it can be incredibly isolated. And then on top of that, there's a cultural, I wouldn't say expectation, but almost a load that when you walk into an organisation as a Māori, they're like, they can do all the Māoritanga, Māori culture stuff. And you think, and I see some of my colleagues who have had the same disconnect as my father and they do identify as Māori, but they've almost, kept that in the closet and haven't revealed it to anyone. And so I see the pain in their eyes when people ask them, can you just translate this for me in Māori? And I'm like, who are you to ask that? It's so inappropriate, because you don't know where people are in their journey. So I'm not going to lie, when I first went into the corporate setting, I was like, I did feel isolated. And I was like, what the heck? And then on top of that, having people ask me to do things. And, kei te pai, I am Māori and we are less represented. So I did feel a responsibility to at least speak up because who was going to do it? But there is that pressure there. And so I had to learn very quickly to be transparent about what I was capable of. Also not afraid to share my journey. I wouldn't say I'm a master, but I was very upfront in saying, no, I can't translate that for you in Māori. You're going to have to ask. We're going to have to either second someone else to do that, or you'll have to ask someone else. So I had to be very confident in being transparent, and that's hard. But what I do appreciate is I'm part of different groups within the engineering sector. So there's a Māori leadership forum where, you know, Māori leaders come together in engineering to discuss industry issues. But we had a wānanga, and our sponsors, or the people we umbrella under that group, are Pākehā, and they came onto the marae with us, and you could see the emails beforehand. It was like, oh, what do I need to do? What are the things that I need to be aware of? What are the tikanga? And what really impressed me about them is their willingness to learn. But the lady got up and said something during our wānanga that hit home. But she was like, I sort of can be empathetic now, because I come onto the marae and I'm nervous and I have no idea what's going on and it's foreign. And I can imagine that'd be a similar feeling to how Māori feel when they are in the corporate setting. And so she was able to empathise in that kind of situation. But yeah, it can be really daunting. But again, it's about transparency, and owning it.
Yeah.
And being confident in it, like not be afraid to say what you do know, and then what you don't know.
Yeah. I love that. And I feel like there's two sides of the coins that you're highlighting. One is the reality is it's tough out there, and people do have these expectations and assumptions, and it happens. And sometimes you're going to be put in those social awkward moments that you don't want, but when it does come, how do you deal with it? And like you talked about, being transparent and just like being assertive as well. It's something we're learning as education. One of the biggest barriers for Pacifica and Māori is that they lack self-confidence. It goes deep into the roots of why, but they lack self-confidence and the communication skills, how to be assertive. So they end up being passive.
Yeah.
Or people end up walking all over you. You just say yes. You stress yourself out. You burn out eventually. But anyway, long story short is like that happens. And, to deal with it, you've got to be assertive and be like, you know what? I don't know. Sorry, I can't help. And don't feel bad or guilty.
Or if you do know, setting boundaries. Like, even if you are fluent in Te Reo and can translate, it's actually just about setting boundaries. Like, actually, no, that's not part of my job. I'm here as an engineer, not as your translator. And I can easily say that. Like, that's easier said than done to say to your boss, hey. Yeah. There's a way, and I get why there's like a bit of passiveness, but I've had to learn to do it and do it early, because otherwise, like you said, it builds up and then you burn out.
Yeah. And I can imagine that being very hard for people, but, definitely, being transparent. And the other side is it motivates you to learn a little bit more about your whakapapa and about Te Ao Māori and that kind of thing. But what's really cool is you've highlighted the social environment that you've had to navigate. And learning, tika and all of that, to help you navigate that. I feel like it almost like corresponds or relates to like the physical environment. You got the social environment and then the physical environment that we talked about in terms of sustainability and how we apply Te Ao Māori here versus here. It's one and the same. But coming back to Te Ao Māori and applying that to sustainability environment, what are some Māori principles or values that you feel like that we could apply to sustainability today to help us in our businesses or even just as an individual who wants to make a difference?
So there'd be three values or principles, you could say, that I think umbrella a whole bunch of other things. And those would be te akitanga. And I say te akitanga because I'm conscious that kai te akitanga is a specific responsibility I feel for Māori, but te akitanga umbrellas it in and everyone as guardians. So I'll say te akitanga, manaakitanga, which is hospitality and support, and then you have whanaungatanga, which is this sort of like whakapapa, this ability to connect. So you have te akitanga and figuring out what your role is as guardians. You have manaakitanga, and I said hospitality and support, but it means so much more than that. So manaakitanga to me is more about working together as community for a specific purpose. That's how I would look at manaakitanga. It's just coming together, united, and then whanaungatanga, and I've talked about this a lot, is about building those connections, being able to connect one thing to another, because you see these days, or presently, systemically, everything is quite binary. So they may be linear, as in, in straight lines, maybe heading towards the goal, but really only one or two initiatives hit the actual purpose. So whanaungatanga, to me, is about building those linear, those systemic things that are linear on top of one another so that they connect. So it heads towards a specific goal. So again, whanaungatanga would be about connecting, but almost bringing everything together for a united purpose. Where manaakitanga to me is more about the community and how we do that and helping. And then te akitanga is about defining that role or responsibility, or actually why are we doing this? It's understanding your why. Yeah.
I like that. They all end with tanga, eh? Make it easier to remember.
The
5 tangas, is it?
Yeah, well, if the suffix tanga is, if you put it in front of any word, it makes it the act of doing something. So it's like, the root word is te aki, but tanga is if you're actually doing it. So I always point that out to people too. So you can have like kotahi, which is to be one, but if you put a tanga there, it's the act of becoming one. So that's why tanga is put on all those words. It's the act of doing it. So I'm very careful. I'm like, well, actually, are you doing it? Only put tanga on it if you're going to be integral to the action.
Yeah. Okay, I love it. So there you go. It's not. It's really basic. Those values are action oriented, and hence makes it practical. Can you think of any projects, because you've got a lot of experience, you've seen a lot, you've been involved a lot, you've been in multiple projects, you sit on a board and all of that. Have you seen any projects where they've successfully applied Te Ao Māori and how they approached sustainability or their mahi?
Yeah, 100%. There's so many projects where it's been successfully done, and also projects where it hasn't been as successful. But I can think of one, and I can't disclose details just because of confidentiality. But for a particular region, they were having trouble with wastewater overflows. And so you can imagine sitting in your home and the manhole outside your house overflowing with crap. Imagine, like, as any person, like, not just Māori, as any person, like, you can imagine the smell, like, it's disgusting. Like, you've literally got wastewater in your streets.
Wow.
So they had an issue there, and our job was to solve those overflows or that problem, because it wasn't just happening in one part of the network; it was in multiple areas. And again, that was a testament to how everything was obviously you've got your network of wastewater infrastructure, but how one area can impact another. But right from the get-go, which is what I appreciate and what I love about who I work for, they prioritised engagement with Māori. Because you can, wastewater is tapu. It's, it's disgusting. It's like you never put your bum on the bench where you prepare your food, because your bum shouldn't go anywhere near the food. And so you can imagine wastewater overflows just being completely against everything Te Ao Māori or sustainability even. It's disgusting. But right up front, we prioritised engagement with Māori. So, and that included being on the whenua with them, going on site visits and understanding where their places or where their priorities were, and also places that were taonga to them. So special places that had history, or even just, streams, because water's our priority. So it was about early engagement. And from there, from understanding their needs, we were able to sort of navigate a pathway forward that was both culturally sensitive and practically that would practically work. But I can imagine if we hadn't have done that, we simply solved it at the node or where it was happening, potential issues that would go against Te Ao Māori values. So for example, it is easy to put, I don't know, increase the storage there at that manhole and be like, oh, put a lid on it and that's done. Like we easily could have done that. But because we engaged early, figured out priorities, and worked with our client, then we were able to look at the bigger picture of actually what is actually going on in the system and the surrounding system and the impact it's having on the environment. So again, it broadens perspective and it creates a higher level of working at rather than just instant fixes. Like sustainable in the sense that we provided a solution that was long term rather than, oh, we'll fix that manhole there until the next term of council comes in or like politics rolls over and we figure out priorities, you know. So that's what I love about working with Māori right from the outset of a project, because then they have that higher level and holistic way of thinking. You know, it's really beautiful to bring that into a project and integrate that.
Yeah, I really like that. And well done to whoever thought of the people first and approaching iwi and whoever in that area before just going to fix the job. You know, it was more than that. And what I love that is it highlights that you need to kind of step back, especially if you're a business, and look at the whole ecosystem that you operate in. Because, like, you know, you're not just selling a product. It's like you're part of a system. You know, the people who buy your product, who use your product, they live in that area, they go shopping here and this and that. And you might have a business site right there, or you do a lot of work in that space. Like, there's an ecosystem for your business to exist and to operate in, and you've got to look after this and that. You know, you can't just be like, cool, I've done my part, good luck, all the best.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's like, you know, you've got to acknowledge every part in the ecosystem, you know, physically, but also from a business perspective, economics as well. So let's say, for example, you've talked about a good example. Let's talk about a tough example. People who might have a desire, they're like, yeah, you know, I'm all for Te Ao Māori. I want to support, I want to get involved, I want to apply it, but they're struggling. What are some of the pain points? What are some of the barriers that kind of prevent people or make it harder for them to apply Te Ao Māori to sustainability?
So I did 2 studies in my undergrad. Yeah, more like it was a sort of like a postgrad level kind of research in the water sector about challenges and opportunities about implementing Te Ao Māori in the water sector. And then I did another study about implementing Te Ao Māori in the waste sector. And they were very similar in terms of, I interviewed together in that research over 80 people, one-on-one, and then had maybe 200 surveys. So quite a big pool of data coming through. And there were 5 commonalities, but the first 3 was lack of understanding, cultural understanding, lack of cultural understanding. The second one was leadership. So, I can dig deeper into these. And it different between the 2 studies, but essentially it was policy and legislation. So both industries or both sectors recognised that while there was a lack of capability and capacity of actual professionals in Te Ao Māori or a Māoritanga, there was a willingness to learn from the 80 or 92% that weren't Māori. So there's such a demand for it. Again, highlighting that there's such a demand for Te Ao Māori. But again, fundamentally, it's that base level and lack of understanding. I can pull out in the engineering sector, for example, in our tertiary education, there's nothing in my field, which is chemical and process engineering. There's no content about the relevance of even engineering in New Zealand and what we have to navigate. So actually, what does it mean as an engineer to be like partners of Te Tiriti? Or what is our responsibility in the RMA? There's like nothing, you know, so it just shows you that base level doesn't exist and that it needs to be there, and that's what everyone highlighted. And again, with business, it's about being transparent about where you're at. One thing, and this is a pet peeve for me, is businesses who It's sort of similar to greenwashing, but I call it cultural washing. So they might, I don't know, translate their name in Māori, but actually don't have any foundation or don't practice kaupapa Māori things or are not tika, like correct in the things that they do. So yeah, it's really important to be genuine and authentic about it. And that can be daunting too, right? Because you're like, now you feel exposed. Like in our business, I did a whakapapa sort of session, like, actually, well, where have we come from and what are we doing? And that was really important so that we could know where we go. And yes, it was quite blunt, but they needed that so they could pivot. So yeah, that is always know your beginning. For me, I feel like if businesses were trying to do it, actually know your beginning and be transparent and honest about it so that it can be in a genuine journey rather than a put-on journey so you can win work. The other one is leadership. And it's not impossible, but it requires so much work if you have to go from the bottom up. So, for example, I started off as a grad and I'm Māori and I'm driving Māori initiatives. It takes so much longer for those initiatives to kick into gear because I'm at the lower tier in that hierarchical structure that we have to abide by in a business. But if you have leadership buy-in, so say, for example, the CE buys into what you're doing, I can tell you now, like, you put something forward, it will happen, and you'll see money for it. So you have to have top-level buy-in, that's what I call it. And then there's things that we, as in the corporate sector, we may not be able to change, which is legislative pieces and policies that come out. And I guess we could have a say in how, and we definitely direct how we navigate that, but that's not something that we can change overnight. And so we have to abide by what's existing and then what doesn't exist. And that, I hope that's not cryptic, but in essence, for Te Ao Māori, in terms of how that influences the application of Te Ao Māori, I can give an example. In the water sector, there is Te Mano Te Wai that's come out, and that's the prioritisation of water, and that incorporates the Te Ao Māori values and, you know, has 3 principles. It's very well articulated. And so for the water space, or the water sector, we had that to go by and base ourselves off, but for example, there's nothing like that in the waste sector. And so, but you know, they can't necessarily control that, but what you can do is make decisions to implement those just off, because it's a great thing to do. So yeah, those were the 3 things that came up in my study.
Awesome. And what would be your advice for businesses who acknowledge they've got those barriers, but how to overcome them?
If it's about, again, I think it's about prioritising where you have gaps. So say, for example, if you lack in cultural understanding, then rather than looking at ChatGPT and Google for that, you probably need a cultural advisor in your business. And if you can always see in a business, if that's actually a priority for you, they will be there. If it isn't a priority, you know, you're not going to increase in that. So it's acknowledging that gap and, like, you've got to prioritise it. If it's an actual thing for you, then yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to your example of the project where instead of just going and fix it, you know, go and consult iwi, the people who know it, who speak it, who understand it, and who can help. It's the same principle. Instead of going to ChatGPT, pull in someone who has the knowledge, who can help, who can advise. And you're doing them and the community a favour by giving that person a job, an opportunity to apply that. You're strengthening the culture. And I love that. There's so much that we can learn about Te Ao Māori, and you know what they've done successfully in the past can also be successfully today if we truly understand the principles and eliminate and minimize some of the barriers that prevent us from applying it. But I do believe in it, and I do see the value in it, not just in sustainability for the environment, but for sustainability in everything, for business, for families, for relationships, for parenting. It can help with anything. Like we talked about the social and the physical environment.
So if we sustain Māori, we're going to sustain the environment. You know, if we sustain Māori, you'll be able to sustain families. You know, it's the same thing. So I totally believe in it. So, look, we're getting close to the end of the podcast, and you've just shared so much value. I've learned so much just sitting here, being like, wow, you know, there's so much connection here. There's so much that we can learn from Te Ao Māori. And, you know, speaking to individuals and businesses out there around sustainability in Te Ao Māori, any last words of advice or tips you want to give?
Maybe not advice or tips, but a reminder that I think everyone should have in the back of their head, I guess you could say, as they make decisions or just think about things, making conscious actions. And that's ko au te whenua ko au. And that's a whakatauki, which means I'm the land is me. And so, yeah, just if you think about that and process that as you, and it could be as simple as things as, oh, am I going to recycle this bottle properly, or am I going to put it in the bin, where it goes to landfill and degrades our entire system. So it's not degrades, but like diminishes our system. So it's just conscious thinking, like if it's true, or if we go by the concept of whakapapa and we link to the land, let's be conscious of the land and the actions and impacts we have on it. So, again, ko au te whenua ko au. I'm the land is me. We give and we take.
That's so cool. What an awesome way to finish it with a whakatauki. Something, you know, it's the way you're thinking, you know, when you're thinking about that and you're consciously thinking about it, it's just hopefully in the future, long term, it just naturally integrates into everything that you do. You pull it forward into your mahi, your family, everything. So I love that awesome whakatauki. And if people want to get a hold of you, get in touch with you in terms of cultural advice or anything like that, how can they do that?
I absolutely love this space and love people coming to me asking for help. Questions are great. I love them. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and Pasi, you'll put my name up and things like that, right? Just add me on LinkedIn and message me. Like, I'm available.
Yeah, trust me. There's not many Lorraine Renatas out there, but you can definitely find her. So Lorraine Renata, there you go. Practicing engineer, graduate engineer, but also a PhD candidate doing engineer as well. So thank you again for your time. You're amazing.
Thank you, Pasi, for having me.